So, good evening. I want to begin by saying thank you. Thank you for creating spaces like this, spaces where conversations about human trafficking, resilience, and hope can begin to flourish. Now, I know some of you might be expecting this talk to be really heavy, maybe even sad, and it probably will be. But I promise I'm not here just to make everybody sad. I'm hoping that I can make you laugh a little bit because humor has been a big part of how I've survived and healed. And my daughters are also here, so I somewhat have to keep it PG, which is probably a good thing. So you may be wondering, who is Cassandra? So I'm a mom, I'm a student, I'm a community advocate, and someone who has been through a lot of trauma and a lot of healing. And here's the truth that I want you to all take with you. Human trafficking doesn't end with a poster campaign. It doesn't end just because a survivor's face is posted on a poster or brochure. It doesn't end because someone gets to check a box that says, yep, we got a survivor's input. It ends when we invest in our youth, in survivors, in safety, in housing, and in long-term support. My story begins long before the word trafficking was ever explained to me. I spent most of my time in a community where things were unstable. Schools, child welfare, policing, none of it was built to protect a problem kid like me. By the time I was a teenager, the cracks of the system became huge holes that I couldn't climb out of. I was manipulated, groomed, and pulled into trafficking before I even knew what it was. And here's the thing. Trafficking doesn't look like what you see in the movies. It's not usually strangers who come and pick you up in a white van or keep you locked in a basement. More often, it looks like someone you trust, someone who says that they love you, someone who knows your weaknesses, and who knows exactly how to manipulate your survival. And survival, that's all I knew. I didn't grow up with hope, and from a very young age, I took care of my mom because of her addiction. I became the kid who was also the caretaker. I learned how to hold everything together, even when I was barely holding together myself. Home never felt like home. When I was in foster care, I used to hate going back home at the end of school because I never knew what mood my foster parents would be in, and I never knew if I would be in trouble for something that I didn't even know that I did. I lived in constant fear. At 16, I became a mom. I was a teenager with a baby on my hip, and I was still just a child, and I had to figure out how to raise a child myself. I dropped out of high school. I was convinced that this was what life had for me. Maybe survival and struggle were just going to be my story. But something deep down in me refused to accept that. I didn't want my daughters to grow up with the same story that I had. So I went back to school. I went back to high school, and when graduation came, I walked across the stage holding my oldest, her little hand, and I was carrying my second daughter. I was pregnant. But while I was building that part of my life, another reality was happening at the same time. My mom had passed away from a drug overdose, and that loss left me feeling completely broken. In the middle of all of that grief, I ended up being trafficked by 3 different people. 2 of them were people that I had known, and only one was a stranger. And that's the reality of trafficking. It doesn't always come from the outside. Sometimes it comes from the very people that you think you can count on. But even then, my life was still consumed with just surviving. My only goal was to make it through the day and to make sure that everyone depending on me was safe. And dreaming about anything other than that felt impossible. Then came the pandemic, and life hit a really, really dark patch. And when I think back to that period, I remember how unstable everything was. I stayed in various shelters until I found a home in community housing. And there were nights where I had to choose between enduring the abuse from my traffickers or risk being on the streets with my 2 children. And that's the reality that many survivors face, which is why safe housing and trauma-informed care are not just extras in someone's life, they're often a lifeline. In the beginning of the pandemic, I was living in Ottawa, and I had to leave because of the danger that I was in from my trafficker. I remember I packed up my house in 6 hours, and I got on a train with 2 toddlers, $40, and I arrived at Toronto in midnight by Via Rail. When I arrived, I stayed in a domestic violence shelter from September of 2020 to February of 2021. It was not a great place to be during a pandemic. We were quite literally confined to our rooms with many, many other women who had experienced the same type of trauma or other things, and overall, it was just not a great place to be. And then I was honestly barely surviving, and eventually I was told by the shelter that I needed to leave, but I had nowhere to go. And they asked me to leave because I had stayed past the maximum time that a person, if fleeing violence, is allowed to stay in a shelter. I was panicking, I had nowhere to go, and everyone around me was comfortable turning me towards the streets with my 2 daughters. And at that point, I still didn't know that I was being trafficked. I didn't have a name for it. And it wasn't until I met amazing people like Kelly Beale and Cassandra Diamond, and later spoke to detectives, that I finally had words for what I had been through. It was painful, but it was also freeing in a really strange way. Once I met Cassandra and became a participant of Bridge North, she immediately took action. She told me, I have the perfect place for you. And it was safe and it was discreet. And she told me it was called Aurora House. And then when I moved to Aurora House in February of 2021, my only thought was another shelter and another place for really annoying social service workers to bug me every single day and always be in my business. But slowly that started to shift. And when I came to Aurora House, I could relax. I let my guard down. And unlike emergency shelters, Aurora House wasn't like anything that I had ever been in before. I could breathe. It wasn't just a temporary bed. It gives me and it gives other women the time and their own space to rebuild. So for the first time in a long time, I could think about moving forward instead of just surviving. Aurora House gave me what I never thought that I could have, which was the safety that I could actually count on. And that's everything when you've been through trauma, because healing doesn't happen overnight and it takes time. And Aurora House, when I was there, they understood that. I stayed in Aurora House from February until June, until I was able to find an apartment at market rent. And during this time, I started my healing journey. I started therapy with my incredible, beautiful therapist who's here today. Where is she? She's there. And bit by bit, I started to rebuild my life. And if you speak to her after this and ask about me, she'll probably tell you I'm really good at avoiding any homework that she gives me to heal. And I hate journaling. I don't do it. But that's part of my healing process. And Aurora House gave me another huge thing. And it was someone that I could always call if I was in a crisis. And knowing that I had the extra support was really important to me. And Aurora House changed everything. And to be quite honest, without it, I probably would have stayed stuck in shelters and maybe back in the same community that I had worked so hard to get away from. And the last place that I wanted my daughters to grow up. They understood that healing doesn't just mean helping survivors, it means helping our families. And as a mom, that meant the world to me. And today, we just moved to a bigger place after 4 years, and my daughters finally have enough space to bicker over who cleans the kitchen, and I'm at the other end of the apartment, so I don't hear it. Which I can thank Aurora House for, because had I not been there, I wouldn't be in this position today. And Aurora House wasn't the end of my story. It was the turning point, and it gave me the foundation to dream bigger for myself and my children. So now, I'm a full-time student, I'm a mom, raising kids in safety. I'm a community advocate and a public speaker who works with educators and policymakers and law enforcement, and I'm also applying to law school. I'm taking the LSAT in about a week, and it's not wow. I'm taking the test in about a week and a half, and it's really made me question my entire existence. And I thought like surviving everything that I did was hard, but then I met reading comp, and then I realized I don't know how to read. So it's been a really, really long journey. But most importantly, I'm proof that healing is possible, that change is possible, and with the right support, survivors don't just survive, we thrive. And sometimes thriving looks like standing here and telling you all about my story. And majority of the other time, it's me eating an entire tub of ice cream and crying because life is really hard. But healing has layers and we're getting there. So why am I sharing this with you today? Because my story is not unique. For every one of me, there are countless others whose voices you may never hear. Survivors who don't get the platform, survivors who are still struggling in silence, and survivors who never make it to safe housing, and survivors who are waiting for support that doesn't exist. Here's the truth. Awareness and rescues aren't enough, and ending human trafficking requires investment. And that means investing in our youth, providing safe housing, access to mental health services, mentorship, and opportunities before traffickers exploit the gaps and before youth become traffickers themselves. It means investing in survivors long-term with training, livable wages, ongoing therapy, community support, and a seat at the table that shapes the policies that affect our lives. And we must end tokenism, because inviting a survivor to speak without supporting them beyond that moment is never enough, and we need systemic change. These are all of these things that I mentioned are things that Aurora House helps with. And if you're thinking right now, wow, that sounds so expensive, just remember that prevention is always cheaper than trying to repair the damage afterwards. And right now, there are survivors that are still trapped in dangerous situations with nowhere safe to turn. And every day, survivors wait, sometimes for months, for a chance to enter a space like Aurora House. This isn't just a statistic. It's real people and it's real lives at risk. Your support today can mean the difference between continued danger and a safe place to begin healing. So here's the deal. Trafficking won't end until we see survivors as people, not just statistics. Until we give youth the resources to never fall into violence in the first place, and until we recognize that healing isn't just a moment in time, it's a process that takes an entire village. And this is why your support matters so much. Community support ensures that Aurora House can continue to open doors for survivors, keep families safe, and change lives. My journey from trafficking to Aurora House to where I am now is proof of what's possible when systems support people instead of failing them. So here's what I want you to take with you today. Awareness is beneficial, but action is more effective. And each one of you, educators, policymakers, community leaders, and everyday people, you all hold a piece of the solution. So let's end human trafficking, not by words alone, but by action. Thank you so much for having me here today.